Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Today marks the launch of the 10th generation of Intel Core CPUs, featuring hyperthreading on every CPU from the Pentium Gold all the way to the new i9. Intel is also introducing their first ever 10-core, 20-thread consumer CPU up to 5.3 GHz max turbo with a 4.9 GHz all-core turbo stock out of the box, and a new motherboard, Z490, featuring the new LGA 1200 socket. Is the new 10th generation i9 worth buying? How well does it overclock? How well does it compare to the Ryzen 9 3900X? Today, we're going to answer all of those questions. First, there is way more to cover and unpack here than I could ever cover in a single video. There is comparisons to older CPUs, should you upgrade. There is a deep dive into overclocking. And then Intel is launching a full product stack here from the Pentium Gold all the way up to the i9, and I simply cannot cover it all or this would be a 2-hour video. Instead, today I am just going to focus on the i9-10900K and how it compares to the Ryzen 9 3900X. These are the top $500-ish CPUs from their respective companies, and we're going to take a look at the performance in gaming and non-gaming. Future follow-up videos will have a deep dive into overclocking as well as different cooling solutions, and I'll take a look at the entire product stack from Intel, the i3, the i5, the i7. They all have hyperthreading this time, and I will also do an upgrade guide versus older CPUs. Is it finally time to upgrade? All of the benchmark charts will be together at the end of the video at this timestamp you see on the screen. If you just came here for some charts and just want to review them, by all means, fast forward to that point and you'll see them all together in one spot. However, if you do so, you may miss the real point of the video, which is not necessarily about the average frame rates so much as it is about the pros and cons of the i9 CPU. Temperatures, overclocking, cooler choices, and a few other things to keep in mind when you're buying a new top-of-the-line processor. The short answer is both of these CPUs are amazing. You could buy either one and you would have an incredibly powerful computer that would last you for many years to come, play any game at high frame rates, content creation, video editing, 3D rendering, multitasking, live streaming to Twitch or Mixer. They're incredibly powerful CPUs, and you really won't go wrong with either one of them. Normally, this would be the part of the video where I talk for the next 10 minutes about everything in the world on this CPU before I show you a single benchmark. Not this time. In an effort to keep the length of the video manageable and to give a chance to talk about a lot of things I want to say, I'm going to go ahead and start the benchmarks full screen here, and then I'm going to continue talking about it without reading every number on the screen to you. That keeps the video short and manageable. Then we'll talk about the benchmark charts, and then I will have some conclusions and follow-up thoughts for you after the charts at the end of the video. For now, let's take a look at the first benchmark, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Debating the i9 versus the Ryzen 9 is kind of like a Ferrari and Lamborghini owner arguing over horsepower and 0 to 60 times. Both are amazing cars with their own benefits and quirks. Having said that, let me cover some of the pros and cons of the i9-10900K right now. First, the i9-10900K is without a doubt the fastest gaming CPU in the world. In terms of max FPS, average FPS, and 1% FPS across multiple games and various testing, it is quite simply the fastest possible gaming experience you can buy. Does that matter? Now that's an interesting question. It matters if you're playing at 1080p with an RTX 2080 Ti, or if you lower the render resolution to 50% and the details to low to get 200 plus frames per second. For the typical gamer buying this level of hardware, playing at 1440p at high detail, it doesn't really mean much because the GPU, your graphics card, quickly becomes the limitation to extremely high frame rates, and the differences between the CPUs tend to melt away. If you have, for example, an RTX 2070 Super or an RX 5700 XT, and you play at 1440p, you likely won't notice any difference at all between these two CPUs. However, future graphics cards may show some small difference. However, you'd be into the hundreds of frames per second in that case, and it really isn't going to make a big difference. Moving on to overclocking, Intel is well known among enthusiasts for having the best overclocking experience. While this is still technically true, the cooling required to continue this pattern has gotten to levels of crazy that I think exceed all but the most extreme users. My 8th generation Intel test bench had a 280mm liquid cooler installed on it, and it had no problem running the i9-10900K at 5 GHz fixed on all 6 cores and 12 threads on any workload at reasonable temperatures. Moving that test bench forward 2 generations to this new i9 and the 280mm AIO could no longer handle it. I was getting overtemps and thermal throttling at stock speeds in Cinebench R20. I replaced the 280mm liquid cooler with a 360mm Corsair H115i Pro, and that resolved the issue and allowed for all-core overclocking to 5.1 GHz. However, it still hit the max 100 degrees Celsius in Cinebench R20, even with the fans turned to 100%. In games, temperatures were far more reasonable, as you're seeing here from the real-time performance footage, but this CPU does still run an easy 20 degrees warmer than the Ryzen 9 does, unless you really crank those fans up. I do have to put a bit of a disclaimer here. The Ryzen 9 was run with a Noctua NH-U12A, which is not an inexpensive cooler in its own right, so that's partly why the temps are so low here. The stock AMD cooler runs warmer and louder, which is why I don't use it on the Ryzen 9. In short, unless you're going open loop cooling, don't bother with overclocking. Run the CPU at stock speeds, as the heat and power consumption from 200 MHz of additional clock speed is simply not worth it. A detailed 400 series chipset overview will follow later. However, a few quick thoughts on the new Z490 motherboard. Z490 comes with PCI Express 4.0 support baked right into it, yet the 10th generation of CPUs from Intel don't support PCI Express 4. The motherboard's top M.2 slot is actually non-functional, being wired directly to the CPU socket, which 10th gen doesn't support. Not to worry, Intel's 11th gen, codenamed Rocket Lake, will support PCI Express 4.0 and will have an extra 4 PCI Express lanes to allow for a single NVMe drive to connect directly to the CPU, in addition to the 16 PCI Express lanes for the top graphics card. That is not confirmed, to be clear. Intel has made no comment or announcement about this. It is all rumor and speculation. However, it is also the world's worst kept secret at this point. Only the timing of the launch is in doubt. Some say late 2020, some say early 2021. We're just going to have to wait and see. The other two big changes on the Z490 involve networking. Intel has finally upgraded the standard Ethernet port included from a 1 gigabit connection to a 2.5 gigabit Intel Ethernet port. And they've also included as standard Intel's Wi-Fi 6 Gig Plus Gigabit Wi-Fi included. This provides superior networking options than most other boards, both from AMD and Intel did. Otherwise, the Z490 is mostly the same as the Z390 was in terms of USB support, platform PCI Express lanes, etc. I am, however, pleased to report that good motherboards with solid VRMs and power delivery are on sale for $150 and up, so the price of these boards is quite reasonable. Intel has, to be blunt, reached the end of the road on 14 nanometers. 10 cores just runs really hot at these speeds, and they desperately need both a new process and a new CPU core design. The latter is coming in 11th generation Rocket Lake featuring the new Willow Cove cores, which should hopefully be 15% faster per core per clock than the 10th generation CPU is, while consuming the same power or maybe even less. The former is coming in 12th generation Alder Lake on the upcoming LGA 1700 in 2022, and it will be a big move to Intel's 10 nanometer plus production process featuring up to 16 cores in a big little configuration. Please note, the preceding info is currently rumor and speculation. None of it is official. None of it is confirmed by Intel in any way. It is all subject to change. It is the current expectation among the current rumor mill and the leaks being circulated on the internet. And frankly, I think it's what is going to happen. But again, it is not confirmed, so take it with a grain of salt. Briefly coming back to overclocking, and again, there will be a more intensive overclocking video at some point in the future. I saw power consumption of the i9-10900K creeping upwards towards 300 watts, overclocked to 5.1 gigahertz when running Cinebench R20 in multi-threaded mode. Temperatures also had no problems hitting 100 degrees Celsius. The power consumption of the i9-10900K is at times double the power consumption of the Ryzen 9 3900X. Ryzen 9 3900X may not be quite as fast in all games, but it is fast enough for most people while running cooler, costing less money, and being faster in multi-threaded workloads. Finally, that brings us to the benchmarks. For those of you who watched the entire video to this point, thank you. For those of you who skipped ahead, I understand, but there was a lot of content before this point. Please consider watching it if you haven't. Assassin's Creed Odyssey 1080p Ultra Detail. There's effectively no difference in performance here. The graphics card still remains the limitation at Ultra Detail at 1080p. There will be a little bit of a larger difference in the future with faster graphics cards, but for the moment, this demonstrates where there just isn't much of a difference because it's both the game engine and the graphics that are the limitation. Borderlands 3 is exactly the same situation. There's effectively no difference here. There's a small 0.1% low difference, but otherwise you won't notice anything between these two CPUs unless you have something a lot faster than a 2080 Ti. Far Cry New Dawn is the first game that shows a serious performance difference between these CPUs. 109 to 131 is in fact a real difference. If you have a 1080p 144Hz display, then Far Cry New Dawn simply will run faster on your Intel CPU. It does it in average, it does it in 1% low, and it does it in 0.1% low. Now I know many of you don't have a 2080 Ti today, but you may be upgrading to a 3060 or 4060 in the future, which may be faster than a 2080 Ti, and so this tells you if you upgrade your graphics card 3 years from now, is there room to breathe, room to grow with more graphics performance even at 1080p. Ghost Recon Breakpoint shows the first game where the Ryzen 9 3900X wins. How is that possible, you say? I am testing with the new Vulkan graphics engine as opposed to DirectX 11. In DirectX 11, the Intel chip actually would be a little bit faster here, but now that Vulkan is out, why wouldn't you use it? There's really no reason not to. 150 versus 141 frames per second, we get a win from AMD. Metro Exodus is an interesting game because if you look at this chart, they're effectively the same performance. Yes, the Intel is faster, but not by enough to matter a couple of percentage points. As I watch the real-time performance numbers back as I record this voiceover, however, there are more times when we are CPU limited on the Ryzen chip and fewer times when we're CPU limited on the Intel CPU. Does not matter for today's graphics cards, but if you're buying a CPU for the next 5 years and you plan to upgrade to like a 4070 or 4080 in the future, the Intel CPU does have a little bit more room to grow. That being said, we're talking about 1080p here and we're talking about 100 frames per second. If you're at 1440p, it really isn't going to matter, probably even 3 years from now. Shadow of the Tomb Raider runs much faster on the Intel CPU. This is one of the largest differences so far. 13% faster in average frame rates, 33% faster in 1% lows. That is a real substantial difference there. Now I know, again, we're on a 1200R graphics card at 1080p, but I believe both of these CPUs are 5-year CPUs. If 144 plus frames per second matters to you, Intel really does have a point, especially if you plan to keep up with your graphics card. If you keep upgrading every year or every 2 years, then the Intel CPU is going to hold that 144 frames per second much better. On the other hand, if you have a 100 Hz or slower monitor, this really doesn't matter for most people, and then the Ryzen is the better value. We have a tie on the Division 2, 145 to 143 on the average, 105 to 107 on the 1% low. This game does scale pretty well across cores and threads, but once you're up to the 10 versus 12 number, it doesn't make nearly as much of a difference, even with this graphics card. Wolfenstein Youngblood in Vulkan, not DirectX 11. AMD pulls ahead again, 205 versus 190 in the average, 165 versus 157 in the 1% low, and 152 versus 148 in the 0.1% low. Vulkan is a great API, and AMD CPUs do very well on it. As more games continue to use it, we may very well see AMD's superior Vulkan performance overtake the higher clock speeds of Intel. World of Tanks Encore 2.0 with ray tracing turned off. Yes, it's supported on this card, but we're not really testing ray tracing. 312 versus 302. We have another win for AMD. Actually, across the board, the 1% and the 0.1% low are faster, and this is a DirectX 11 game. That being said, these frame rates are so ridiculously high. Yes, AMD wins, but the percentage differences actually aren't that large. After the big speech on the Vulkan API, we have a bit of a role reversal here. World War Z, this was tested using Vulkan. The Intel CPU dominates the AMD CPU. We are 16% faster in average frame rates, 187 to 218. We are a whopping 34% faster, 130 to 174 on the 1% low. That is a huge difference, and I ran this multiple times, more than 3, to verify that it was repeatable, and it was. So even with Vulkan, Intel definitely wins this matchup. Averaging all 10 games together, we get a tie, barely. On average frame rates, we're at 134 versus 140, which is a 5% difference. And on the 1% low, we are 108 to 116, which is a 7.5% difference. The 0.1% lows are basically equal. These numbers are so close to each other. It's why I made the comment earlier in the video. You could buy either of these CPUs and it would be amazing and wonderful, and it would be great performance. The Intel's a bit faster and might have a little bit more high frame rate future in front of it, but the AMD has perhaps more smooth frame rate in front of it. We're talking about minor differences. Good job to both AMD and Intel here. Dollar cost per frame per second with a combined CPU, motherboard, and cooler cost. There is a $200 net difference in price between these as tested, not counting RAM, storage, graphics card, etc. $759 for the Ryzen 9 combination, $959 for the i9 combination, including the coolers that I actually used for this testing. What you're seeing here is a 21% difference in price per frame per second. $5.66 on the AMD side, $6.85 on the Intel side. Another way to look at it is by the time you add storage, graphics card, case, power supply, etc., a $200 price difference between AMD and Intel over a $2,500 build is about 10%, all things considered. If you prefer Intel, don't let $200 stop you from buying it. If you don't care, then AMD is the better value, but you'd be happy with either choice. They're both amazing CPUs. Moving away from game performance, multi-threaded performance, the Ryzen 9 wins hands down. It has 20% more cores. It is 18% faster in 7-zip versus the Intel CPU, which makes sense because it's 20% more cores, so 18% faster is about right. Now, the clock speeds aren't the same, but AMD's instructions per clock cycle in 7-zip are a little better than Intel's, so they kind of balance out. CPU-Z's built-in benchmark, something easy and quick you can run on your own computer. Compare your single-core score to this. 580 is impressive on the i9-10900K, faster than the Ryzen 9 3900X because of course it is, but in multi-threaded, naturally the Ryzen 9 wins because it has more cores. Moving on to Cinebench R20, we have a single core score of 523 on the Ryzen, and wait a minute, what's going on here? How does the Intel lose? Well, it loses because in this particular benchmark, for whatever reason, my motherboard refused to turbo over 5.1 gigahertz. If I manually set it to 5.3, then it ran fine and it got about 540 points. But in this one test, it just wasn't going over 5.1, which was kind of interesting since since it would certainly run faster in other circumstances. On the multi-threaded test, 17% faster, because of course we have 2 more cores and 4 more threads, so of course it is. Thank you all so much for watching all of that. 2 gold stars for all of you who are still here. A 3rd bonus gold star to everybody who has watched this entire video without fast forwarding. If you're ready to buy a CPU today and you're looking for the premier flagship $500 CPUs from AMD or Intel, most of you should buy the Ryzen 9 3900X. Several reasons why. Number 1, in May of 2020, when I'm recording this, the Ryzen 9 is $120 less expensive than the $529 launch price of the i9-10900K. Prices change in the future, link to the video description, but at the moment, it's $120 less. It runs cooler, it runs quieter, and it uses far less power than the i9-10900K while being faster in multi-threaded performance. It is slightly slower in single-threaded performance, and in most games it's going to be a hair slower, but for most people that is really not going to matter. It also includes an included cooler in the box, the Wraith Prism RGB cooler. Now, it's not the best in the world for a great CPU like this. It runs hotter and louder than this beautiful Noctua right here, but it will run the CPU just fine, and if you don't want to spend more money on a cooler, it is an option. The Intel chip doesn't come with a cooler. And to be completely blunt, you're going to have to spend a lot of money on one. At a minimum, you're looking at a Noctua NHD 15. I wouldn't put anything less on this beast of a CPU. I think most of you should probably go with a 360mm all-in-one liquid cooler, if not a custom open loop cooler if you're going to the max extreme performance and you want that 5.3 gigahertz on all 10 cores and 20 threads. That is an expensive cooler. The one I have installed on here is $180. $120 more for the CPU, plus another $180 for the cooler. Yes, it's fast, but man, that's a lot of money to spend for a couple of percentage points and a few more frames per second in most games. Having said all of that, Zen 3 and Rocket Lake are both coming very soon, and both are expected to be about 15% faster than these CPUs at the same clock speeds and the same price points. So basically, they'll both be almost the same performance all over again. You may want to consider waiting for those if you don't absolutely have to buy today. You'll gain some additional features on the Ryzen 3 side, you'll gain PCI Express Gen 4 on the Intel side, and if both of those launch later in 2020, you don't have very long to wait before those come out. Rest assured, we'll cover them when they do come. It is also worth noting that these are not the only choices available in the market today. If you need an interim CPU, then perhaps the Ryzen 5 or the i5 might be worth considering, but we'll cover those here shortly in a separate video. Links in the video description below will be to all of the AMD and Intel CPUs from this generation, their respective motherboards, and some of the parts that I used here, including the coolers that you see. Those are affiliate links to Amazon, Newegg, and eBay. Using those links is a great way to support the channel at no extra cost to you. Click those before you check out, whether you buy an Intel CPU, an AMD CPU, or, believe it or not, a jar of peanut butter. It all counts, and it supports the channel and allows us to keep bringing more awesome content like this to you. If you are able, please consider supporting the channel directly by using the join button right here on YouTube. Hitting that button allows you to become a channel member, which comes with several benefits. At the $2 support level, you get access to the Tech Deals Discord, which has private chat channels. You'll find that linked at the bottom of the video description. It also gives you access to the Tech Deals emojis for use in our live streams and a special loyalty badge that shows up next to your name in the comments section below, as well as during live streams. At the $5 level, you get access to over 60 private exclusive videos only for supporting members of the channel. Right here on YouTube, there's a playlist that contains all of those for you to watch. And then there's a further support level for extra special fans that has some bonuses, including some merch that comes along with it as well. You can also support the channel on Patreon and Floatplane. Floatplane gives you early access to videos and no YouTube ads, and Patreon gives you early access to the filming scripts as well as benchmark charts before videos are published. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you love it. Remember to subscribe to the channel with a big huge red button directly below. Hit the bell notification icon next to it to be sure to be actually notified when new videos come out. Comments down below. I'm curious to see what you guys all think. Intel versus AMD. Who is the winner of this comparison? What are you going to buy? Or are you just going to wait for the next generation for Zen 3 and Rocket Lake coming maybe in as soon as 5 months? I'll be curious to see what you all think. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see all of you next time.